together, you and I and Rick, and had come up with that. And Rick loved Nancy's work, and we'd even shot a couple of the promos that were to begin to lead to this. And then Herd decided to ixnay the whole thing, and the Midnight Express never became Horseman. Woman never became the manager. The whole thing fell in the hole. But that was, what a super looking faction, as they call them these days, that would have been.
You know, this is just my opinion, that would have been the best working, and that's saying something. That would have been the best working Four Horsemen of all times, as we know, and a lot of people don't. Bobby Eaton is one of the greatest workers of all times. Stan Lane's not far behind, but Stan had that look, that fit with the Horsemen, not taking away from anything from Barry Windham or Tully Blanchard or Ole Anderson, but that would have been a revival too. Wait
a minute, what about Luger? Did you want to take anything away from Luger? No.
I'll tread lightly there, Jimmy.
Yeah.
And the thing was, I mean, just think of this. You could have put Arn Anderson and Bobby, Rick and Stan. What working tag teams they both would have been. You have these two workhorses, Arn and Bobby, who at that time, to me, they were the best two performers in the business. And then you have Stan Lane, Ric Flair, and Woman. What a spectacular looking package. And I mean, you could have interplayed them all. And that goes back to what you and I have always talked about. Herd's inability to even see talent. I mean, he put WCW at least a decade behind Vince when he took over.
Yeah.
And you and I could tell stories for all times, but how couldn't you see that? And then there's Jimmy Cornette. You know, you're one of, as everybody knows, I'm not just blowing smoke, you're one of the greatest talkers of all times. And I always thought, and you and I had talked about, the interplay between her and you would have been amazing.
But per Herd's instructions, I would have been retired. I would have been a manager. I would have been an announcer. I was going to get out of managing. He was like, "Oh, we got to move him to the announce booth." You know, so, yeah. But I could have held the microphone for him. But anyway, but that run there, that's where everybody knew who Woman was, and right. That's where she really perfected that. And then for the early '90s, you started working for me a good deal in Smoky Mountain, and you were still doing your thing, and Nancy had a run. Well, both of you worked for Paulie up in ECW, and Nancy had a run up there.
Right.
But I guess was it finally what you went back to WCW about 94-ish or so during another one of the management upheavals, and
right.
And you were back there, and at that time, I think Nancy was off. She had not come in to WCW yet. But
right.
I guess basically what I'm beating around the bush for is, and some of this stuff is hard to talk about, but during that time period, and especially right when Benoit came into WCW, I think you were the booker by that point in time. But you and Nancy had already started to have issues. This wasn't a thing where it suddenly Benoit was introduced into the equation and suddenly there became problems. The problems pre-existed. Am I correct?
Right. We had problems before Chris came in for 6 months. I mean, it happens daily. It happened to us. We grew apart. Truthfully, there was that age difference when she spent her early 20s with me, not seeing she saw the world, but not on her own. And Benoit, when we put him with her, his wife was pregnant at the time. And he was very leery about it because he had a meeting with Eric and I, and he said, I got to make sure my wife doesn't get upset about this. He was very concerned. She was pregnant at the time. So, yeah, we had probably, I'm going to say, 6 months we had problems. We had 2 houses at the time that we lived in, and I was spending more and more time down the Keys, and she was spending more and more time in Daytona. And then as it eventually went, an incident happened that I actually stayed in Daytona the Keys 98% of the time, and the only time I go up to Daytona was when she wasn't there. And I mean, we knew where we were headed, that we were headed for, a divorce somewhere down the line. And we tried to patch it up a couple of times, but things just didn't work.
You guys got together, we said early 80s. When did you get married, actually?
I got married in 92, but we were together for 7 years. Well, let's see.
Well, 8, 9.
We were together almost 8. Full time we were together, 13 years, but the first year and a half we weren't living together. After that, we were living together.
All right. And let me ask this before we skip ahead, because you mentioned something I want to follow up on, but what was your relationship like with Chris Benoit when he first came into WCW? What was he like to deal with? You're the booker. I assume you had you met him before? He'd only been in the business in Calgary and for a few years at that point. But what was your interaction?
I had never met him before. I had seen him, Jimmy, and you're going to have to help me on this one. I think the first time I actually saw Chris, I was watching PBS when I was in Japan. I wasn't watching it in Japan, but I was working in Japan. When Bobby and him were partners for a little while.
Oh, good Lord. Brian Last, help us out on that. Could that have been...
Chris came in at the end of the Bill Watts regime, at the end of 92, early 1993. I think that would have been the period of time where he may have had some tag matches with Bobby Eaton, probably early 1993.
And he didn't spend long there at that time on that run, did he?
No, he was out, I think, by the end of the spring.
Yeah, so basically when he came in 95 and you were the booker, that's the first time you'd actually interacted with him personally.
Right. And, I saw, he was a diamond in the rough. It wasn't going to take much to polish him up. I think that, as Brian and Jimmy know, that there is a different psychology in Japan, correct?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so
there's even a different side. There was a different psychology in Calgary too. That not everything was going to translate, but you could tell. Obviously, you knew you knew what you had. You had a diamond in the rough. You just needed to Americanize him a little bit.
Yeah, and that was not going to be hard, I didn't think, and it wasn't. He looked like an athlete. He was an athlete, and his performance was as solid as it could be. I mean, him and I wrestled, and he was such a good performer. We had the match of the year in Baltimore. He drugged me through that. He was a fabulous performer. And I saw that early on, and I saw that in the whole group of them, because when they came back, and this is when they first, they didn't come back. Chris came back. Malenko, I brought in Chris, Malenko, and Eddie Guerrero. They were working for Paulie. And I brought Paulie in the business.
Damn you.
And I called Paul and said, listen, Eric wants these guys really bad. I've held them off for 8 weeks. He's going to take them no matter what I ask, because I didn't want to see anybody go out of business, especially Paulie. And I said, well, they're going to come. So when they came, I mean, you guys know what I'm going to go to next. Here we have the big stars from WWE: Hogan, Nash, Razor, Kid. And then we had these fabulous workers come in, and all they did was help the cars amazingly, because, you know, you got to see this technical work and fast-paced, and along with then Rey Mysterio was there, Conan's group was there, and then you got to see the intricate angles with the NWO. So, you know, it was a relationship with talent that really fed off of one another. And it was, I thought, if you look in my head, we had just brought in the luchadors for the first time into the United States. We had Malenko, Benoit, Guerrero, and Shane Douglas. I had the Giant. I had Luger, Sting. Then we have the Hall, Nash, the Kid, Hogan, Randy Savage. I mean, Jimmy, you may not understand this scenario, but Brian will. It was like me having the 1927 Yankees, Brian. How could I lose? Right?
A baseball reference, because I'm a novice as a baseball fan.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was incredible, an incredible array of talent.
Right.
You know, under one roof.
Right. And you know, so
what was Benoit like personally, though, back in those days? Because I met him several years later, and I've always talked about how quiet, polite, you know, professional, you know, whatever. Was that just me? How did you find him at that point in time in his life?
I found him the same way. He was very professional. He was all business. He was quiet guy. He had a small circle of friends, but they were very loyal to one another. And every night he was going out to have the best match on the card. And he almost had it every night. I mean, his performance in the ring was, I mean, and coming, this is going to sound funny, Jimmy and Brian, see if you agree with me. Like you said earlier, Jimmy, he came from Japan and Calgary, which doesn't really translate. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but the psychology doesn't translate well in the United States. So he was learning and absorbing that quickly. The other thing, he had two friends and Jericho was there too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that group of young, exciting talent fed off of one another. Every one of them wanted to go out and steal the show every night. And damn it, they did. I mean, you know, every night I used to say to myself, nobody's going to top any of these guys' matches. Now, psychology-wise, you know, in the build-up, you had the NWO, which is brand new. People hadn't seen it. People actually believed that they came down from WWE and were going to try to take over. And, I mean, it was one of those things that you caught lightning in a bottle, and I think they've been searching for that ever since.
Well, you had been doing a thing, and I'm going to give you a compliment here, because people have always believed that you were who you presented yourself to be. Whether it was the,
Right.
we